All right, so today we're going to be doing a deep dive into something that, honestly, I've been seeing everywhere lately, and that's loneliness. But, our source material today goes way beyond just like feeling a little bit isolated, like you just want to stay in for the night kind of thing.
Mm.
This source is saying that we are facing like a full-blown epidemic of loneliness. And it's saying that this has some serious consequences for our health and well-being. I mean, have you heard this?
Oh, yeah. And it's not even just like mental health, which, obviously that's a huge part of this whole thing. But like the source is connecting loneliness to like some pretty surprising physical health problems, too. Like they even compare chronic loneliness to smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of like how it impacts our bodies.
Okay, wow. That got my attention. I think most people can agree that smoking is bad for you. But I'm really curious about how loneliness, like just feeling lonely, could have that serious of a physical impact on your body.
So the source kind of dives into the science behind it. And it basically explains that loneliness triggers a stress response in your body. And this leads to chronic inflammation, which is linked to all sorts of health problems, everything from heart disease to diabetes and even a weakened immune system.
So it's not just all in our heads. It actually is creating some kind of physical reaction inside our bodies.
Exactly. It's pretty fascinating how something like loneliness, which seems so intangible, can have such a real impact on our physical health.
Yeah, that is pretty alarming, honestly. The source also talks about the impact of loneliness on our mental health too, right? Is it really as straightforward as just feeling sad or down?
Well, everybody feels lonely sometimes. That's totally normal. It's part of being human, but the source is highlighting chronic loneliness, when it's just an ongoing thing, and that's where it gets a little scary. They're finding that's linked to higher rates of depression and anxiety and even suicidal thoughts.
Wow. Okay. So it's not just a fleeting feeling. It can actually contribute to some pretty serious mental health challenges.
Yeah.
I guess it makes sense, though. If you're constantly feeling isolated and disconnected from everybody, it's how could that not take a toll on your mental well-being?
Yeah, for sure. And the source also talks about how loneliness can create this kind of vicious cycle where when people are lonely, they withdraw from social interaction, which then just makes the problem even worse.
Oh, totally. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You feel lonely, so you isolate yourself, and then that makes you feel even more lonely. It just sounds like it would be so difficult to break out of that cycle.
It really can be, and the source stresses how important it is to recognize the signs of chronic loneliness and to seek help if you need it. It's really not a sign of weakness, It's actually a sign of strength to reach out and ask for support when you need it.
Absolutely. There's one section of the source that I found particularly concerning, and that's the connection between loneliness and cognitive decline. I had no idea it could impact things like memory.
Yeah, it's scary stuff. There's been a lot of research, and the source highlights this, that there's a strong correlation between loneliness and cognitive decline. Especially as people get older, it seems like social interaction is super important for maintaining a healthy brain.
So does that mean that by staying socially active, we can actually help protect our brains as we age? I mean, that is encouraging, but it also makes me think about older adults, like my grandparents, who might be living alone or not have as many opportunities to socialize as often as they used to. Is that something that families and communities should be more aware of?
Definitely. The source actually suggests that families and communities really need to play a bigger role in preventing and mitigating loneliness, especially for older adults. Even simple things like regular visits, phone calls, inviting them to social events, that can all make a world of difference.
Wow. It sounds like loneliness is just way more complex than I originally thought. So I'm curious, we live in this world where we're constantly connected, through technology. So why is this epidemic of loneliness happening right now? The source kind of delves into this a little bit, right?
Yeah, and one of the key things they point to is the stigma around loneliness, admitting that you're lonely.
That's counterintuitive.
Kind of counterintuitive, right? Because we're more connected than ever, but so many people feel ashamed to actually admit that they're lonely. They worry about being judged or seen as weak or something. So they just keep it all bottled up. They suffer in silence.
That is so sad.
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought about it that way before. So instead of reaching out and trying to make those connections, people are just isolating themselves even further.
Exactly. And that silence makes it so much harder to actually address the problem. It's almost like this hidden epidemic. And the source is saying we need to start talking about it more openly if we actually want to find solutions.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Yeah.
But are there other things besides the stigma that are contributing to this feeling of isolation, even though we are so hyper-connected?
So the source points to a few societal changes that have definitely played a role. Things like the rise of remote work More and more people are working from home. And then there's also the decline of like community spaces and even just the way we use social media. All of these things can make people feel more lonely.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, I love the flexibility of working from home, but I have to admit, I do miss those little interactions with colleagues,
Yeah.
And I definitely have caught myself feeling worse after scrolling through social media. It's like you see everyone else living these perfect lives.
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? Technology, like, obviously it has the potential to connect us, but it can also lead to these comparisons, and this feeling that we're not good enough. And that can really fuel loneliness.
It's almost like we're surrounded by all these people, but still feel completely disconnected. So given all of this, what can we actually do about it? Like, are there things we can actually do? The source mentions some practical steps we can take, right?
It does. And it starts with recognizing that even small actions can make a difference, like even little things.
Yeah.
They talk about the power of what they call micro-connections.
Micro-connections, what are those exactly?
So think about those like really brief, everyday interactions we have with people all the time, like just smiling at someone you pass on the street, or chatting with the barista when you get your coffee, or like striking up a conversation with someone you're sitting next to on the bus or the train. These little moments of connection may seem insignificant, but they can actually help to chip away at that feeling of isolation.
I like that a lot. It feels way more approachable than like trying to go out and make a bunch of new best friends overnight. It's more about just being open to those opportunities for connection that are happening all around us every day.
Exactly. It's a shift in our mindset, realizing that connection doesn't have to be this big, profound thing. Sometimes it's just those small interactions that can brighten someone's day. And, it might even brighten our own day, too.
That's so true. It's like a ripple effect. One tiny little act of kindness can create this feeling of connection that just kind of spreads outwards.
Exactly. The source also talks about the importance of what they call community spaces.
Oh, yes. I'm a huge believer in this.
Yeah.
Places like libraries, parks, community centers, those are so vital for building a sense of community, right?
Absolutely. They offer these opportunities for people to come together, even if they're not directly interacting with each other. Just being around other people can really help combat that feeling of isolation. It reminds us that we're all part of something bigger, We're part of a community.
And for those who are struggling with like more severe or chronic loneliness, the force also mentions the importance of seeking professional help, right?
Yes, definitely. And they make a really important point. Seeking therapy or counseling is not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of strength. It shows that you're willing to take care of yourself. And a therapist can really help you, like by giving you coping mechanisms and helping you build social skills and addressing any other underlying mental health issues that might be contributing to the loneliness.
Okay, so we've talked about some individual actions we can take, but what about the bigger picture? Like, is there anything we could do as a society to address this epidemic of loneliness?
The source is arguing that it's not just an individual problem, it's a societal one. And we need to come together as a society. We need to make a collective effort to find solutions. They highlight things like community initiatives and public policies that encourage social connection.
So, like, what would that actually look like? What kinds of initiatives or policies are we talking about?
One example they give is investing in public spaces, specifically ones that encourage social interaction. So like well-maintained parks, accessible community centers, vibrant public libraries. They can become these hubs where people can come together and connect.
I love that idea. It's all about creating those third spaces, places outside of work and home where people can just gather and be together.
Exactly. And the source also suggests promoting programs that bring younger and older people together. This not only combats loneliness for both groups, but it also creates this sense of community and this shared purpose.
Oh, that's a fantastic idea. I bet that would be so beneficial for everyone involved. Are there any other societal solutions that they talk about?
Yeah, one more that they really emphasize is addressing the root causes of loneliness, like poverty and social inequality. When people are struggling to make ends meet or facing discrimination, it's so much harder to prioritize social connections.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about creating a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. And that includes feeling a sense of belonging and connection.
Exactly. It's this multifaceted approach,
Yeah.
It recognizes that there's this really complex interplay of individual, social, and systemic factors that all contribute to loneliness.
I feel like this whole deep dive has been so insightful. I have a much better understanding of this loneliness epidemic now and all the different ways that we can address it, both individually and collectively.
Me too. It's a really good reminder that even though loneliness can feel so personal, like it's just you alone, it really affects us all. And if we can work together, With empathy and understanding, we can create a much more connected and compassionate world.
As we're kind of wrapping up this deep dive, I keep thinking about this one thing that the source mentioned. The idea that we can actually fight back against this loneliness by telling stories. I mean, it seems kind of counterintuitive.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It might seem that way at first, but sharing those personal experiences with loneliness can be so powerful.
I guess I'm just curious, how does storytelling actually help with loneliness?
So the source argues that when we share our stories of loneliness, we're actually helping to break down that stigma surrounding it.
Yeah.
It lets other people know that they're not alone in what they're feeling.
Right? It's like normalizing those feelings of isolation. It's like saying, hey, this is a human experience. We all go through this.
Exactly. And the source makes it clear that storytelling isn't just about sharing the struggles. It's also about sharing how we've coped and found connection, how we overcame those lonely feelings.
Right. So it's about hope and inspiration. It's like saying, I've been there and it's totally possible to find your way back.
Yeah, exactly. The source also brings up a really good point. We need to also listen to the stories of people who experience loneliness differently than we do.
I think that's such an important point. It's so easy to get stuck in our own little bubble. We really need to be mindful of our biases and recognize that loneliness might look different for different people.
Right. Depending on their background, their identity, the circumstances. It's about having empathy and being open to learning from other people's experiences.
This whole deep dive has been a real eye-opener for me. I feel like I have a much better understanding now of just how widespread this is and all the different ways it can impact people. It's also made me think a lot about my own actions and how I can maybe either contribute to this problem or be part of the solution.
I feel the same way. It reminds me that it's our responsibility to create a world where people feel more connected.
And it starts with those everyday actions, right? Just like
Yeah.
being kind to people and smiling and having conversations.
Exactly, those little things. They might seem small, but they can make a huge difference.
This has been such a great conversation. I have a whole new perspective now on loneliness
Yeah.
and what we can do to combat it.
Me too. It really highlights how, even though loneliness makes you feel isolated,
Yeah.
we're all in this together.
Well said. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the loneliness epidemic. We hope you learned something new today.
And remember, you're not alone. There are resources and people out there to help you.
Until next time, keep diving deep and keep connecting.